televisions have changed so much. When we think about it, I mean, that's one of the memories I have as a child. And as a child, is how important the television was to my dad. I've always told people, I said, we may have been 2 house payments behind, but we were going to have a color television set. And we may be the only, really were the only one in the neighborhood who had the console model. You remember the big console model? It's like you had to have neighbors over to just help you move it. They were so big. And then if you notice today that you can't hardly give away a television, a used television. People try to sell them, and people won't even buy them because you can buy them so cheap and all. I remember when Janice and I got married, one of the things that came out, one of the features on the television was the picture-in-picture. If you remember that, you could be watching a show, and then down in the corner, you could be watching another show. And I was going, this is awesome. And for somebody who was like me, who was always wanting to try to keep up with several things at one time, having I could watch 2 programs at the same time. That was just the best thing in the world. And of course, we had to buy a television that had picture-in-picture. But really, it makes me think about today, we live picture-in-picture. We live in this world picture-in-picture. What I mean is, we live in dual realms. We're living in the picture of the physical world, what we see and we touch and we know, we experience, but we're also living in the picture or the realm of the spiritual world. We may not can see the spiritual, but we can see the effects of the spiritual. We don't see the wind, but we know the wind is there because we see the trees moving, and we know the wind is there. So we live in a dual realm. You realize that right now, the next couple of days marks halfway through 2021. Halfway through 2021. Sometimes we need to be reminded of things like that. We need markers in the road. We need the reminders that say, hey, you better get on your horse because things are moving fast. If you plan on doing something in 2021, half of it's gone. We need those kind of reminders that remind us that time is moving on, or the end is closer than it was before. Sometimes we need to be reminded that a lot is at stake. It's not to be a Debbie Downer. It's to remind us that what's of importance, and we need to take care of it. Today, I want to read a lengthy passage of Scripture to start with, and I just want you to listen to these verses as I read them. It'll be on the screen as well. But then I want to talk about something along the lines of living picture-in-picture, the dual realm living. Matthew 25, start with verse 31, says this. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his throne in heavenly glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you have been blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king will reply, I tell you the truth, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. And then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me. They also will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison, and did not help you? He will reply, I tell you the truth. Whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. They will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. No less than 8 times in the verses that I just read, depending on how you want to count it, you can come up with more, but no less than 8 times there's a reference to the dual realm world at which we live in. How they're intermingled, how they both operate at the same time, the physical world and the spiritual world, and the importance that one has upon the other. And this is not the only place in the Bible that talks about the spiritual world and the physical world and how important what we do here is and how it connects to that. It is throughout the entire Bible, especially in the New Testament. This is our Core 52 passage. That if you've been keeping up with our reading through Core 52, you know this is where our passage, our memory verse comes from this week, is from these verses. This is the bottom line. This is one of the bottom line teachings of the Bible. And since a little bit later in our Core 52 study, we're going to spend the Sunday on talking nothing about but heaven. Today in that spiritual realm, that dual realm, I want to talk about hell. We want to talk about that. It's not because I want to talk about it, and I want to make people uncomfortable sometimes. But if you're going to talk about heaven, you've got to talk about hell, because this is a bottom line teaching. Theologian Peter Kreeft said, "Of all the doctrines of Christianity, hell is the most difficult to defend, the most burdensome to bear, and the first to be abandoned." And whether you're a seeker and this is the first time you've been in church in months or years or whatever, or maybe you've been a Christian for 40 or 50 years or fall somewhere in between there, every one of us have struggled at some time or another with the answers to why there is a hell. Why would God do this? Does a good and loving God really provide a hell? Does he send people to there? How can a good God do this? No matter how difficult it is and how difficult the questions are for us sometimes to answer, and sometimes how hurtful it is because of somebody in our family that we fear is there or is heading there, we cannot abandon it. We cannot ignore it. Because to ignore the spiritual realm is to ignore what God has put us here for. To do so means that we not only abandon the teaching of hell, we abandon heaven. We abandon God. And just because one of us or some of us or all of us or a whole church says, we're not going to deal with that, we're not going to believe in that, we don't believe, that doesn't make it go away. The reality of what we believe doesn't change what is true. It's what God says is true. So we need to look at this, and I just want to try to answer some questions here today. First one is this: what do we know about hell? What do we know about it? We do know that it's one of the most talked about subjects in the New Testament. It's mentioned in all 4 of the Gospels. Every major writer or writer of the New Testament, Paul, Peter, James, John, including John in Revelation, talk about the eternal judgment. It talks about heaven and hell. What are some of the things we learn when we read what they've taught us? One, we learned that hell is about exclusion. Just the parable that we read last week, you remember that it said when the man was not dressed in the wedding clothes, he says, cast him out. Throw him out. He's not going to be a part of this celebration. So part of being confined to hell is that we're going to be excluded from what God has planned for us for eternity. It also teaches us that it's darkness. Light all through the entire Bible is a metaphor for goodness, for understanding, for knowledge, for being able to see. But hell is described just the opposite of that. So there's going to be unanswered questions. There's going to be confusion. There's going to be a lostness. because of the darkness. We know that there's going to be anguish from what we taught. In that same parable, it said, cast them out into darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That means there's great sadness. There's going to be regret. We will have to live with the fact that I blew it. You know that feeling, don't you? I blew it. I had the chance to, and then you fill in the blanks. But it says here, there will be the anguish of knowing that we are responsible for that. In Revelation 20, verses 13 through 15, Revelation 20 is that great description of Judgment Day. Just to pull out a couple places, it says, and each person was judged according to what he had done. Have you ever done this? You ever done this that something happens and your first reaction is, who can I blame for this? And we will look around for a while, and sometimes we can get very creative how it's somebody else's fault. But if we're real honest, sometimes, and I tell people this sometimes, I says, I looked real hard, but this is nobody's fault but mine. I'm going to have to take the blame for this. Part of being separated from God, and we're going to talk about that more, part of hell is that we're going to be left with knowing this was our choosing. He goes on in verse 15, he says, if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. The evidence will be irrefutable. There's no ways around it. It's going to be my fault. If I'm there, it's going to be my fault. We will take responsibility for the life that we have lived. We learned some other things. It says that it's frightening. If you read in the scriptures, it mentions Gehenna several times, and this was just a valley outside of Jerusalem, and that was used as the garbage dump for all of Jerusalem, and so it was a very disgusting place. The fires burned there. They smoldered. Sometimes they were flaming. Sometimes they were smoldering, but they never went out. There was always everything you can imagine about where a place that every form of garbage, from human and animals to anything you could imagine, was put there. And it was used to talk about sometimes this was going to be an utterly disgustable place, a place you would not want to be. We learn from places we read that it will be painful, just the existence of being there. And I think this is going to be difficult. It says that it's going to be consuming. In other words, it's going to engulf our lives. Have you ever been going through a bad time? Maybe you've got a toothache or a headache or something's going on, and you will say, I got to get my mind on something else. And you try to ignore, you try to move away from what it is that's hurting. Spending time in hell is going to be all-consuming. You remember the parable that Jesus told where the man said, he spoke from the place of hell, and he said, would you allow him to come take his finger, touch the tip of his finger in water, and just touch it from a tongue to have any relief? Do you remember that story? He's saying you'll be looking for any relief that you can, but there's be nothing but consuming in everything you do. We will be left to ourselves. This is probably the most overlooked part of the teaching of hell, because it's very easy for us to concentrate when it talks about fire and the pain and such as that. But what is going to make it the worst place imaginable is that we are going to be left with ourselves in the absence of God. This will be the first place that we will not have any influence or the presence of God. We can understand a little bit of that, of the anguish of that. When we, as old timers, when we look around at our country, we look at America, and we remember back how it was. And now we look and we're living in this time, and we'll go, man, and it's just an anguish, and we knot up inside and we go, oh, what I'm seeing is our country who has turned its back on God, and you start to see neighborhoods and cities and whole philosophies and institutions that have no interest in God. Though you can tell God is not working in these places. And you know how that affects us? How disgusting that is to us? What we're going to find is that hell is the place that there is no influence of God. There's no presence of God. And we experience that now just in a tiny, tiny bit. The writers of the New Testament were attempting to describe a spiritual realm that they had not experienced and trying to describe it in a way that we might could understand it. I do not understand all there is about the doctrine, the teaching of hell. I do not understand all there is to know and understand about the doctrine and teaching of heaven. But I do know enough that there's one I want to go to and one I do not want to go to. And I do trust the one who tells me. Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit. I trust him, so that guides me in where I want to be. One other question: why then is hell necessary? Well, several things that maybe you hadn't thought about these before, but hell is necessary because life demands it. Hell is necessary because life demands it. If there is no life beyond this one and no accountability for the life that we live right now, then what are we living for? If this is all that there is, then life really has no meaning. We have no more significance than a mouse or a mosquito. And isn't it interesting that that is where we're finding people who are totally abandoning God and his ways and his teachings and his belief is exactly where we're finding people are arriving? That life does not have any significance or true meaning. And that's why you see people giving up on life so early. But I don't believe that this is just it. And I don't believe it's because of me or whether I'm good or whatever. I believe every one of us deep down inside have something that God put in us that says there's got to be more. There's a little burning something that tells that. I believe that because I not only experience and feel it myself, but Ecclesiastes 3:11 says this. He, talking about God, has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men, yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. In other words, he just described me. I don't understand everything. I can't understand everything about God, but I know he placed in my heart eternity, that I look for something like that. If there is no immortality, then everything is permitted. And if everything is permitted, nothing matters. Our very human dignity demands that there's a heaven and hell. Think about this one. Justice demands it as well. For many, the doctrine of a spiritual world, especially hell, is very offensive to them. I can't believe in a God that would send someone to hell. I couldn't follow a God that would allow that to happen. I can't devote my life to him. Really? I say I can't believe in a God who wouldn't do that. Because God is a God of justice. We live in a time, maybe more so than ever in our history, where there is more talk about justice. Every day we hear about social justice. And I'm not opposed to that at all. But what I'm saying is, how can we call for social justice and call for eternal justice to be ignored? You see what I'm saying? Justice is justice, and eternal justice is even greater. We can't ignore the pain and the suffering that has been brought into this world by evil people. We can't ignore that and not think that there has to be a day of reckoning for these things. One of my favorite pictures from the Old Testament, and it's used about 6 times, is where God is addressing Israel or addressing people in general and talking about when you cheat people, I see what you're doing. Micah 6:11 says, shall I acquit someone with dishonest scales, with a bag of false weights? In other words, the farmer works hard. He brings his stuff to market. He thinks he's getting weighed for the pounds of his crops. And the people are cheating him because they've got false weights. God says, I see that. And I'll hold you accountable for that. Does anybody think those things do not need to be dealt with? I watch a lot of strange things on television. I'll be the first one to admit that. But I stumbled on a channel that does narco wars. Does anybody watch narco wars? Okay, it's just me. They're going to go off the air. It's just me. But they trace all of how drugs and stuff came into America and how we got to the place we were. And I saw one that was took place, decades and decades and decades ago, about how a handful of people, powerful mobsters, it was the mob, said, we're going to bring in heroin into our country and we're going to get people hooked on this, and it's going to destroy whole generations of people. But we're going to be millionaires. And I just watch it and I go, how can you be that evil? He said, I'll destroy people for generations, but man, am I going to be rich. Do you think that needs to go and not be taken and accounted for by God? Does justice not need to be served? On April 19th, 1995, Timothy McVeigh detonated a truck bomb in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, killing 168 people, including 19 children in a preschool daycare in the Alfred Murray Federal Building in Oklahoma City. Do you not think that man should have been brought to justice for what he did? Or Osama bin Laden, when he planned and set into motion the 9/11 attacks that killed over 2,900 people who were just going to work that day? Does anyone think that justice should not be served? God is a God of love. God is a God of justice. And just by the very fact that God sent his son, Jesus Christ, to die on the cross, portrays that. You see, God in heaven could have said, I forget all the sins, forget the shame and the guilt, I let it go. But he's a God of justice as well. So he said somebody has to pay for the sin, the guilt, the shame, the evil that's been taking place. And so my son will do that because he's the only one qualified. Justice and love satisfied. God is a God of justice and love. Now, please, for anybody sitting here today, I am not looking forward to anyone standing before God, separated to spend eternity in hell. I do not look forward to that one bit. There's no one that I dislike enough that that's what I wish for them. But I do look forward to the day that when all evil is taken accounted for, that thrown into the pits of hell will be the things that have addicted the lives of people for generations and ruined their lives. They'll be thrown into the pits of hell. I'll look forward to those things, the drugs, the alcohol. I look forward to cancer being cast into the pits of hell. Dementia, Alzheimer's. I look forward to those things. I look forward to where there is a pure and good world for eternity. So therefore, if I want justice to be done, then I must look and say, this is needed. This needs to take place. The third and final thing I want to mention this real quick is love demands it. Love demands it. No one likes to be a puppet or to be manipulated. We desire free choice, and that's how God made us, with a free choice. He didn't make us puppets. It says He made us in His image. So therefore, we have a choice. It's like one father, you've heard it many times, that God is described many times as a loving father. And one father said, I don't care how much my son or daughter hurt me, I could not condemn them to hell. Well, what would you do then? Think about it in these ways. You're an earthly parent, but your son makes it very clear that he wants nothing left to do. He wants nothing else to do with you, and he wants to be as far away from you as you can. And he moves to California, and you beg him to come back. You go to see him and beg him. You send others to say, please come back. Restore our relationship. Come back together. You send him money so he can travel back. You do everything you can. But do you go to California, kidnap him, bring him back, and chain him to the bed in the house? Is that love? That's kidnapping. That's imprisonment. And that's not how God operates. God calls, He invites, He sends, but God does not trap us. Peter Kreeft said, those who do not wish to love God must be allowed not to love Him. Those who do not want to be with God must be allowed to be separated from Him. The answer then to the question, why would a good God send people to hell, is that He doesn't. But He will let people go there if they so choose. Hell is not some eternal torture chamber God has constructed to inflict pain on people He doesn't like. And look at this last statement. Hell is simply a place where God is not, so that people who don't want to spend eternity with Him don't have to. Hell is an alternate destination for people who don't want to go to heaven. And you're going, but who doesn't want to go to heaven? Who would make that decision? We make it every day. People make the decision every day that this is not where I want to be. And the awesome and wonderful news for us is that we don't have to go there. It was never prepared for us. We read that earlier. It's prepared for the devil and his angels. It's not our desired or intended destination. And we can use that as we live in this picture-in-a-picture world, that we realize we're living in the physical world, but at the same time we're living in a spiritual world, to be a great motivation to spur us forward to determine where we do want to live and spend eternity. A couple of weeks ago, as a church, we went out to Godwin Coppage Park and just had a Wednesday night picnic and just had a wonderful time. The weather was perfect. Pizza and ice cream and games and everybody having a great time. And everybody was there in this public park. We made a point just to say, please come over, get some pizza, hey, get some drinks, ice cream, there's water, and just come be a part. And it had gone on for a while, and I noticed a family was walking by, and I'd not seen them. And so I went over and I said, did y'all get some pizza? Did y'all get any ice cream? And the lady said, oh, we're not part of this group. And I said, that's the good thing. You don't have to be. All you got to do is come over and enjoy it. Just come be a part of it. You see, that's the invitation that God just keeps giving to us over and over and over. No matter what you've done, what group you're in, where you've been, you can come and be a part of the family of God. And hell does not control you any longer.